I'm very much a Carolina Tar Heel, true blue, and I mentioned this earlier today just so you can understand how passionate I am about Carolina. So I have this standing agreement with my college roommate that if the Heels ever make it to the Final Four, that we will travel for it. And earlier this year, as everybody knows, the Heels made it to the Final Four. But unfortunately, it overlapped with my kindergartner's spring break, and we were all going to Hawaii as a family, and it's the only week that they had off. So we left on a Saturday flight to Hawaii, got to Hawaii, found out the score of the game, and they won, and then I hopped a red-eye to Detroit to go meet. So my family stayed in Hawaii. I flew to Detroit by myself on a red-eye, caught the game, and flew back the next morning at 6 a.m. to rejoin my family in Hawaii. So that's how passionate I am about Carolina. So somebody taught me, I did an internship when I was in business school, and I worked for half a summer for the president of NBC Entertainment, this guy named Warren Littlefield. So he was the guy that brought us Seinfeld and Friends and all these great shows. And I lifted this title from him. I think his title was Sex, Lies, and Network Entertainment or something like that. So I figured Sex, Lies, and Online Video would be a good way to get people sort of excited and interested. And I will, by the way, talk about Sex, Lies, and Online Video. But I have to point that out, that this is Warren Littlefield's inspiration, not mine. So let's get right into it. I wanted to talk about three things. My hope is that if nothing else, that the story of my little adventure and my thoughts on media and where it's going may help you. And in fact, the last third of the discussion, I would love to just share two thoughts that may help you for the students in the room as you think about your careers and the way that you're going to manage them as you go out into the crazy world that we live in. And so these are the three things. Just to talk about my adventure, talk a lot about media and technology and how they intersect, and then also talk about your adventure. So let's get right into it. So we'll start with talking about my adventure thus far. And here's where it begins, in the projects, otherwise known as Hinton James. And so I lived in 551 Hinton James, and this is long before Horton covered it up so nobody could see it. This is when Hinton James was loudly and proudly exposed to everyone, and you always scratch your head and say, wow, that's an ugly building. So I lived there. I loved it, but this is where it started. And so I came to Carolina not knowing a soul. I was out of state and quickly fell in love with it. And this is in many ways sort of when I became an adult in terms of just figuring out the things I wanted to do and where I wanted to go. And so a really important 4 years of my life. I spent time, as Dean Folkerts mentioned, at two buildings. I spent a lot of time at Howell Hall, which, for those of you that don't know, was the home back in the early 90s for the journalism school. So I spent a lot of time at Howell Hall, and I spent a lot of time at Carroll Hall, which is what was the home for the Keenan Flagler undergraduate business program. So I would shuttle back and forth and finish the educational classes in both of those programs. And so I have tremendously fond memories of both of those programs. There were two professors that made a huge impact on me. One was Professor Gary Armstrong from the business school, and the other was Professor John Sweeney from the journalism school. And so this was a picture of him recently that I found on the internet. This is what he looked like back then. And very Mad Men-esque. And so now I was, if you want to see what I look like sort of back in the day, here's how sort of I, in my head, think about the way that I looked like when I was back at college, which was like this. And the reason why I chose this is that this is a guy that gorged himself on the college experience. And I felt like I gorged myself on the college experience here at Carolina. I just did everything I could to just soak it up. Everything from the academics, of course, the social side, the athletic side. I could not, when you finish Carolina after that kind of a 4 years, you're almost tired because you got so much out of it. And for me, Carolina was so special, not just because it was a fantastic education, which is why I came here in the first place, but because it was so much more. It was a complete package. And so I feasted on the buffet that was UNC Chapel Hill, and I was very, very glad to do that. And I would certainly encourage everybody to do that because it's one thing to sort of gorge yourself on the academics, which you should do, but make sure you get the whole package. It really makes you who you are, and it continues to influence me today. In fact, I picked up my wife here, for gosh sake. So this is a very important thing to socially get out there. I was very fortunate when I was at Carolina. In fact, even before Carolina, I had one of the best things that ever happened to me is that my passion found me early in life. And Professor Sweeney and others here who got to know me well, this will be very familiar to them, which is I have always been inspired by the Walt Disney Company and specifically Walt Disney. And so this is a picture of the first Disney lot in Burbank, and then obviously that's a picture of Walt back in the day. And for whatever reason, I was very lucky to sort of find this passion in my life, and that I was so inspired by him because he used technology and entertainment to create these wonderful stories, whether it was stories in theme parks with animatronic figures, which nobody had done at the time, whether it was very much using high technology at the time to create 3D elements with Snow White, and this pan and scan type experience and 3D visualization back in the day, which was done with these different layers of cells with cameras on top. So crazy stuff. And I was so excited to actually read about this guy. I became a student of Walt Disney and very much set my sights on actually trying to follow a similar career path. And so the painfully obvious thing came to me, which was, well, if I want to sort of get inspired by that, I guess I should learn a little bit more about how Walt Disney created the company. And I read every book on the planet about it, but I thought, you know what, maybe I should go work there. And so what I did was I wrote a tremendous amount of letters. And I did this in my junior year, and I did this in my senior year. An obscene amount of letters. They were cold call letters. This is long before email. And I would write all these letters, and none of them were ever answered. But as everybody in this room who's a student knows, you can't let that get you down. You just have to keep going and going and going. And so I wrote more letters, and I got to this point where I was like, you know what, I'm going to inject some creativity into this thing because I'm a big believer that creativity can solve anything. And so I wrote a comic strip instead of a letter. And so what I did was I put together this comic strip of me arriving on the desk of a Disney executive in an envelope. And then I would hop out of the envelope and use the things on the desk to describe my skill sets in terms of my creativity, my tenacity, my judgment, and this, that, and the other. And so it was a bit of a Sunday-style comic strip. And I was very fortunate that that actually led to a job, both an internship and then ultimately where I worked soon after graduating from undergrad. And so for me, creativity and tenacity and just keeping, going at it ultimately led to goodness. And particularly in today's economy, I would strongly encourage you, don't give up, don't lose hope, just keep going because a bunch of questionable judgment people hired me at Disney and it started my career. So this is Disney headquarters, by the way, in Burbank, which is quite fun because you've got the 7 dwarfs holding up the roof of the Disney headquarters.
I hope this microphone wasn't that important. I think this is a backup, right? This is a backup. So let me just put it back up. I'm going to be getting a bill for this right after I'm done. I'm going to put it on this side because it's getting in the way. Great. Okay, so you're on?
Nope. Oh well.
It's dead. But the good news is this works. And so anyway, so this is Disney headquarters in Burbank. After that, I went to Harvard Business School, which is a fantastic educational institution. I will say that I don't feel nearly as much affection as I do for Carolina, which I think is just, I love Harvard Business School, I do, but there's something special about Carolina. Maybe it's the time in your life, maybe it's something else. I happen to think it's just the whole complete education that you get that starts in the classroom and expands to so many other things. And so I did that after Harvard, and then I went to this little company called Amazon. It was a private company at the time. We could all very much fit in the first couple of rows here as a company at the time. And it was a company that had great ambition and great aspiration. And for me, it was a very obvious choice to go and do this because I got to, interview with Jeff Bezos, and then I got to meet the 4 other executives that were at the company at the time, and that was, there was, some other people there, but not many. But there was something special about it in terms of the vision that Jeff had, the obsessiveness that he had around customers and where he set the quality bar, and the fact that they were swinging for the fences. And I just felt that even if this thing blew up and became a disaster in terms from an economic or a business sense, that I would regret not working with a guy like Jeff Bezos and the company that he was creating. And so I went out to Seattle and worked for this company that my mother thought it was of highly questionable judgment going to work for. And she's a big fan now, by the way. But it was something that just felt right. And so I went off and did that. I thought I would be there for 2 years. I ended up being there for 9 years. And so we grew from a small private company, became a public company, had 13,000 folks working at the company by the time I stepped away. And then that leads us to an evil plot to destroy the world, which is Hulu. And so then the past several years of my life have been all about Hulu. And so that's a little bit of context on my journey thus far in terms of where my adventure has led. I'd love to jump in and talk about media because I think a lot of people in this room, perhaps you're curious about sort of the Hulu of it all and media and technology in the future. And so I figured I'd talk a little bit about that. So let's jump in and talk. So I'm going to go old school here a little bit. In addition to studying up on Walt Disney when I was a kid, I tried to read everything I could get my hands on in terms of the history of media. I was fascinated by this book called The Genius of the System by Thomas Schatz. So if anybody hasn't read it but loves media, you should totally buy the book. It's an out-of-print rare book, but it's a fantastic description of the evolution of media and why studios exist and television stations and all everything in between. And so these are logos of basically the only three choices that you had as a consumer back in the early 1950s, which was ABC, CBS, and NBC. This was the golden era of television. Things were so good back then in television. You had three companies, and what they would do is they would basically say, let's put on a show. And so they'd basically create something like I Love Lucy, and they'd hire Lucille Ball. They'd make this show, and wow, did people watch it? I mean, it was just amazing that all these families across the country would show up in front of their television at a given time on a given day of the week because the television broadcaster said so. They said, well, if you want to watch I Love Lucy, you got to watch it Thursday at 8 o'clock. And people actually did it. They actually showed up and huddled around their TV sets, and boy, did they watch it. And it was a money printing press for the three broadcast networks. Just to give you a sense, so if you go back and take a look at the percentage of televisions in America that were turned on, what percent were tuned to I Love Lucy at its peak versus the current hit, which is American Idol? You had 71.7% of televisions in America that were turned on tuned to I Love Lucy. That's how dominant programming was back then. Today, American Idol, which is the gorilla, you have 14% of televisions that are turned on at its peak tuned to American Idol. So very, very different situation in terms of programming and entertainment and media. This fragmentation of the audience, the fact that consumers have so much choice, is just a very, very different business. So the easy days of being able to have just three networks and a very small selection of content through which a consumer can consume, those days are long gone. And I'll go into where I think this is going. So in newspapers, day-old news was all the rage. It was fascinating. Like everyone would run out and buy a newspaper and read yesterday's news. It was like the greatest thing going, that so many people were so excited to go and pick up this paper and read about what happened yesterday. And for those of you that are fans of The Daily Show with Jon Stewart, they did this fantastic bit where, I don't know how, but they got into the New York Times. And they went and did this investigative piece at the New York Times. And the reporter, who of course was just totally having a field day, basically asked the head of the New York Times, point to me, what in that newspaper has happened today? And the gentleman was just dumbfounded. He just didn't know what to answer. And so it can be a very discomforting thing if you're in traditional media. By the way, the rumors of media's demise are so beyond sort of exaggerated, and I'll go into why that's the case. But the medium is very different, and so I actually think there's a lot of good road ahead, but you have to be very careful about how you make decisions about it, and I'll go into that at the end. So the ad guys, wow, did they do good in this time. So it was sex, alcohol, just taking money from people in terms of, just like Mad Men, shows in terms of just unbelievable that you had advertisers lining up to present their brands next to these television shows and to get in the newspaper and to basically be guaranteed a mass audience. It was the television networks and the newspapers, there was nothing better for them because they could guarantee a mass audience, and that's exactly what advertisers needed access to. So the whole ecosystem worked really, really well, and the advertisers and the media companies were very, very happy. But then something happened, and what happened was the internet. Al Gore invented the internet. And so you've got, Al Gore and his latest invention the internet happened, and all hell broke loose. But what's interesting is that it's easy to forget now. So here in 2009, it's easy to put up a slide and say, oh, then the internet happened. And instantaneously, the world changed for media and all these other industries. That actually wasn't the case. I pulled up a Time magazine cover, which is sort of a good barometer for when did the internet really start getting hyped and talked about in the mainstream press. This was from 1993. Nothing materially happened on the internet for any businesses, media or otherwise, in 1993, or 1994, or 1995, or 1996, you could argue. It wasn't until 1997, 1996-ish, late 1996, when industries started to get impacted by the internet. And so the lesson here, because I think it's helpful to know as these things happen, is that really important technological shifts, they underwhelm in the short term, but they overwhelm in the long term. So this article from Time magazine and others like it, they basically describe the fact that the internet, the information superhighway is going to change everything, and this, that, and the other, and oh my God, you're not going to put your socks on the same way because of the internet. That didn't happen for like 4 to 5 years. But today, when you look at it, none of us could actually think about living without the internet. You will cancel your TV service, you will cancel your phone service, you will probably cancel food before you stop your internet connection. And that just wasn't the case when the internet first came onto the scene. So just know that if you're thinking about your careers and whatnot, the next great technological change, it might underwhelm in the short term, but overwhelm in the long term. And so that's something that Bill Gates actually said a number of years ago. So funny things started to happen. So I put up here, there's 2 brands up here. One is called TechCrunch, and the other is New York Times. New York Times has been around a long, long time, one of the most esteemed and known brands out there in media. TechCrunch, nobody knew what the heck TechCrunch was. A silly name, what is this about? Simple blog that a guy named Michael Arrington started. He actually ran it out of his house and did so very much up until last year, I think. So here's a guy, just by himself, writing blog entries about technology companies in Silicon Valley. And so he started to write this blog, people started to read it, then people would send him ideas for other companies that he should write about, and suddenly he had all of Silicon Valley sending him tips and information about hot new startups and this and that. And the crazy thing is that Michael Arrington and TechCrunch became the go-to source for all technology news, not New York Times. And so here is a guy in his bedroom having field reporters that don't even get paid. They just send them tips on the breaking stories that are happening, not just in Silicon Valley, but anywhere around the world in technology. And it's fascinating to think that in such a short period of time, a company like TechCrunch can be a world-beating brand in technology, even more so than the New York Times, who's been at this for a long, long time. So very interesting things started to happen in the newspaper business. In retail, you had this little company that nobody had heard of called Amazon, funny name, basically emerging on the scene where in a short period of time, they had a market cap that was multiples the size of Borders and Barnes & Noble combined. And so people were scratching their heads, just not quite understanding, like, how is this possible? Amazon was just started in 1995. That's when you could first order a book. And within 4 years, it has a market cap that is multiples the size of the rest of the book industry combined. Something serious is going on here. And then in music, you see the stat that says 95% of all downloaded songs last year were illegal. They weren't paid for. Whereas the music industry for decades had this robust, fantastic industry where you could buy CDs, before that 8-tracks, just this wonderful vinyl before that. Now suddenly, the vast majority of songs were not even paid for. So you can imagine what the music labels were feeling in terms of when they saw this happening. 2 things on video, and I'll read through this because there's a lot of text here. So more video has been uploaded to YouTube in the last 2 months than if ABC, NBC, and CBS combined had been airing new content 24/7, 365 days a year since 1948, which happened to be the same year that ABC started broadcasting. So just in 2 months, YouTube will have uploaded more content than the entire history of the premium video broadcasting business combined. It's astonishing when you see the rate of changes happening that the internet enables. I'll mention 2 things with regards to Hulu here. In 18 months, Hulu attracts more users, 38 million, than the combined subscriber base of the nation's 2 leading cable companies, each of which have been in business for 20 years or more. So this is Time Warner Cable and Comcast. And that's just in 18 months. And then finally, you've got Sarah Palin, or I should say Tina Fey, impersonating Sarah Palin on Saturday Night Live. But the funny thing about this is, It's on Saturday Night Live on NBC, but more people watched it not live. And in fact, more people watched it not on Saturday night, not even on NBC. They watched it on the internet, this specific skit. And so something very, very serious is happening in terms of all these industries that have been so sort of kind of happy with the way that things were working for so many decades. And so the big question is, well, why? And this is where the little bit of the lies come in terms of sex lies and online video. It's not about the internet. And I think that there's been so many stories written about this, which is, well, the internet did this, the internet did that. I don't think it's about the internet. There's no doubt that the internet is a major part of this, but it's not about the internet. And let me explain why. I think it's about the customer. The internet it's just a means. It's just a tool. And by that I mean the internet is simply a tool to deliver a much better customer experience. I mean, that's all it is. It just so happens that you can do things like real-time publishing. You can do things like massive selection. Instead of having 135,000 books in your biggest Barnes & Noble, you can have 5 million at Amazon. So it's absolutely about the customer, because the internet on its own does not change industries. It's the customer response to companies and the service offering that they deliver. That's what changes industries. And so here's what happened. All these examples that I gave you, what happened was certain media companies, or technology companies, quite frankly, because a lot of the ones that I shared with you are primarily using technology, even more so than traditional media skill set. Some media companies began to serve their customers very well, and I would argue much better than other companies in the space serve their customers. And so it's not unlike Starbucks. So go back and just use a very traditional industry. You've got Starbucks, and they're in the premium coffee space. I mean, how dry and dull could that be? Howard Schultz is like getting all excited and all hot and bothered about this, no, premium coffee, that's going to be the wave of the future, and this is in the 70s, early 70s. He turned out he was right. He simply delivered a better customer experience for coffee drinkers. He made it convenient to be able to run into a great coffee shop anywhere you looked, on any corner. In fact, there's even an Onion article that describes that there's going to be a new Starbucks built in the bathroom of an existing Starbucks. That's how obsessive this guy is about making it easy to find and discover and consume great coffee. So he made this wonderful thing that nobody ever purchased before. Suddenly, they have an addiction to having a coffee every day. I haven't missed a Starbucks hot chocolate in probably 10 years. I don't drink coffee, but I drink a Starbucks hot chocolate at least one time a day because it's convenient and it's a great experience. And by the way, media is not unlike that. Media is an impulse business. You do not need 30 Rock to live another day. You just don't. It's a great show. I love it, and I watch it every week. But if I missed it, I am still going to breathe another breath tomorrow. And so when you realize that, you realize, well, wait a minute, okay, so if it's an impulse business, it's discretionary. The number one rule I know about impulse businesses is that if you make it more convenient to consume, people are going to consume a lot more of it. And so that's sort of the Starbucks is very much an inspiration for Hulu, and I think it's an inspiration for a lot of the technology companies that are just killing it in their industry. And so what we did was we actually, this is going back a number of years now, 2 years, 2.5 years, where we got together to talk about Hulu. And this is long before we named the company Hulu, and Hulu stands for holder of precious things. It comes from a Chinese proverb. And so given that Hulu's all about premium content, that's why the name Hulu. We got into our offices and asked the question, what if? And again, all about the customer. We set aside the internet, set aside technology for a minute. We got in the office and said, well, what if? And just so you know, I'm a big Carolina fan. This is my office. It's a very drab office. It's got whiteboard wallpaper on all sides. So basically, I'm able to write, and the team is able to come in, and we brainstorm and write on the walls. That is Sarah Michelle Gellar, the cardboard cutout in the corner, and she's wearing a Carolina Tar Heel away jersey. But on the table is a home jersey, so I've got both covered. And there is a Carolina basketball that Christy wore. It was very nice to share with me. And so that's my office. And what we did was we got in this office, and we asked the question, what if? And we basically said, if you were today trying to start a world-beating customer company that's focused on media and specifically premium video, what would you do? And so what we did was we asked questions. We were like, well, wait a minute. Well, what if we could help people find and enjoy the world's premium content, when, where, and how they want to? We thought that would be actually a very, very interesting mission if we could do that, because I know that when I was growing up, God, I would have killed for a service like this. I used to get dropped off when I was a little kid, and I'd run home from the cul-de-sac that I lived on, and I would go in, and darn it, Speed Racer would be 7 minutes into it, and I'd always miss the first 7 minutes of Speed Racer, and it was maddening. I feel like I watched the whole thing, and I always missed the first 7 minutes, so I never know what the theme song was or anything like that. So this, for us, is a very personal thing, like, wow, this can solve the Speed Racer problem and so many more things. So it really was because of more than just Speed Racer, but that helped. So the other thing that we asked is that, what if we could build, and this is from the marketer side of things, the advertising of it all, what if we could build the world's most effective video advertising service? What if we could do that? What would it look like? How would it work? What would a marketer say about this once they actually use this as an advertising medium? And then finally, we asked the question, well, what if we could deliver a service that customers, users, advertisers, and content partners unabashedly love? Not just, it's okay. It's, no, I love it. I'm so passionate about it. I've been so lucky where earlier today, through the course of the day, I've had probably no less than 15 people come up to me and say, I just want to tell you how much I love Hulu. And it's so nice, and you guys are so nice to say that. And I don't think that people are saying it for any other reason, because I hadn't met a lot of these people before, and they say, in fact, somebody just outside said, Hulu has saved my marriage, because they've got, like, somebody wants to watch one show, and the other person puts in the headphones and watches it on Hulu, and so we're all about saving marriages. It's very much a part of the culture. And so we're going after trying to create something that people love. And part of this, quite frankly, is just we think it's the right strategy. And it's also one of those things where at the end of life, when you're old and gray, we want to look back on this as a team and say, gosh, we did something that actually, we aimed appropriately. We swung the bat to try and hit it out of the park. And if we fail honorably, that is okay. And so this is what we're going after. We don't always hit it, but this is what we're going after. And then what if we delivered, this is very similar to in terms of where you place the quality bar, what if we delivered brain spray awesome quality? That's a big kind of term that we use at the Hulu offices around the world, which is brain spray awesome. And the reason why we use this term is that a user wrote a blog entry to describe their Hulu experience. And they said, my first Hulu experience made my head explode in a brain spray of awesome, which I was so happy when I saw this online. We actually absconded with this quote. We always give attribution, but we absconded with this quote and put it on our walls in the offices. We put it on the backs of our team t-shirts. We actually printed napkins with this quote. And it was very funny that there's a woman named Marissa who wrote this for her blog. She doesn't know us. She doesn't anything. We were in Chicago, which is where she lives, having an event for some advertisers. So I found her on Facebook and said, I know this is odd, but I work at Hulu. I wonder if you would, if you're in downtown, we'd love to meet you. We actually really love what you wrote about us. So she walks into this little kind of ballroom, and everybody's wearing her quote on the back of their shirt. And she sees these napkins with these little sausage rolls with her quote, and so she was great about it. And so she's, in fact, her quote was actually written about in Fast Company today, which is great. So she continues to have good legs for this quote. And so this is Hulu, which is it's a web service that's on the internet, accessible, anytime, anywhere. And again, the whole what-if scenario was very important to us, which is we wanted to design a service that didn't look like other websites, and we were very careful about what that meant for us. So the sort of where the company is and where it's heading. These are the stream counts on a monthly basis for the last several quarters. And so back in the first half of last year, we did about 96 million streams in the second quarter of last year. And right now we're doing about 500 million on a monthly basis. And so very, very excited and very humbled, quite frankly, in terms of the response that we're getting from users across America. We just couldn't be happier. We started with 8 charter advertisers when we went live last March, and that number 8 has grown to over 400 advertisers served. And so I spent a lot of my time in New York City. It's so fun to kind of think back on how last year and the year before, I would just knock on doors. And it was very much like the UNC days where I was doing cold call letters and hoping that somebody would answer me. That was where we were with Hulu in the very earliest of days. We had to beg and borrow relationships to actually get introductions to ad agencies, because nobody would want to meet with us at the very start because, well, what's this Hulu thing? It sounds so childish, and what could it possibly mean for my business and my clients? And so now it's so great. We actually go in and we meet with the CEOs of these companies, and it's fantastic because we're able to help educate them on what Hulu is and what we aspire to be and how we can really, really help their clients. And so it's fun to see that journey. And just to give you an example of what this means for advertisers, so if you were to take an ad, let's just say for Pepsi-Cola, and run it against 30 Rock, and you did that in the living room on Thursday night, and you also ran that same ad against 30 Rock on Hulu, the recall rates of both the Pepsi name and the message itself, the ad message itself, would be about 2x on Hulu than it is on the living room. And so these are the kind of things that you can get when you actually listen very carefully to your customer, in this case advertisers, and think about, well, how can I design the service so that more people remember your ad, people are more engaged with your ad, and people ultimately will take action based on the creative and the messaging that you put out there for them. And so we're so happy with the results thus far. We started with 2 content partners, 2 of the investors in the company. The kind of the total ownership of Hulu includes Fox, NBC Universal, the Walt Disney Company recently invested in the company, the Hulu team owns a significant portion of the business, and then we have a private equity firm that invested in the business called Providence Equity Partners. We started with 2 content partners, and I'm very, very happy with the job the team has done. We now have over 200, actually 230 content partners, and so everybody from the Walt Disney Company to Warner Brothers to MGM to Sony to the NHL, tons and tons and tons of folks. So very, very excited about the progress of the business in the last 18 months. So the natural question might be, so where is media headed in the next 20 years? I assume that that's a question that might be on a lot of students' minds. I think it's a very natural question, and I certainly have opinions on it in terms of where I think that the media business is heading in the next 20 years. And the short answer, and I don't mean to be glib here, but the short answer is that media will evolve into what it was always meant to be, which is a brain spray awesome experience for its customers. There is no doubt that there's going to be a lot of drama, there's going to be a lot of carnage, there's going to be plenty of uncertainty, but make no mistake, in the end, customers are absolutely going to be served and served very well. When you have the means and the infrastructure to do so, nothing can hold that back. There's very, very little, anything in history that I'm aware of where customers were very clear with regards to what they were hoping to get, and not having a business actually step in and provide that service. There's way too much at stake here for this not to happen. And so a little bit more, less glib kind of headline, but more detail and meat so that perhaps this can help you as you think about your careers. I think media is going to be what you want, when you want, how you want it. I think this is across print, this is across music, this is across video, all forms of media. The whole notion of scheduled appointment and whatnot, that'll happen, but by the way, it'll happen because consumers want it to happen. So the American Idol finale, the Super Bowl, sporting events, there will be a long, long future for event television because that happens. There'll be a long future for event happenings and news and whatnot. But it's not going to be the exclusive realm of media as it has been so much in the past 50 years. And so what you want, when you want, how you want it. I think media is going to be in real time. People are going to become very frustrated by not having real-time updates. I get very disappointed when I use Twitter all the time. I go to search.twitter.com and I go and search for the word Hulu because I want to find out what people think about a new feature. And when I don't have Twitter, I get very nervous because I feel like I'm reading yesterday's news when I have to wait for a blog post, let alone a newspaper article and things like that. And so I think that consumers worldwide are going to demand and expect real-time media. And I think there's going to be a lot of great business opportunity and career opportunity for people that focused on the real-time aspect of media and what that'll mean in the next several decades. I think there's going to be a transparency that was never around before in media and technology, in that our goal as a company is that I want to make sure that there's minimal distance between our customers and ourselves as a team. And so we all publish our email addresses out there. I'm jason@hulu.com. And we engage in dialogues with our customers because we think it's very, very important that Hulu, the brand, is seen as something more than this company, this startup, that it's actually, people describe it in human terms and very much think of it as somebody that cares and somebody that's listening and somebody that is working very, very hard on their behalf. And so I think a transparency is absolutely going to be critical for companies to do impressive things in the going forward space. I think there's going to be a tremendous amount of power and participation for the people. And this is one of the things that I love. This is what, as a kid, got me so frustrated and was a big motivator for me to spend my career in what became Hulu, which is to not have the speed racer moment happen, to give power to users to be able to be in control of their media experience, and to let them participate. I absolutely love when Obama was inaugurated. There was this great thing online where there was a Facebook application and a CNN application that were fused together where you could watch what was happening and either hear what the world was saying about it in real time on Twitter, or you could actually have, or Facebook I should say, Or you could have just your friends, show up on your little roll right next to the video. And it added such a great element and a great richness to the experience where not only did you see what some executive producer at ABC thought about the inauguration, but you saw what your friends felt about it and the goosebumps they had. And it just made the whole media consumption experience that much richer. And so I absolutely think that there's going to be a tremendous amount of power and participation for the media, for the consumer going forward. I think advertising is going to be much, much more relevant to the user. I'm sure that we have all had our share of experiences where you're sitting watching a television show and somebody advertises Viagra and you're 22 years old and you're like, is this relevant? Something's wrong here. And so there has to be a much better way to target advertising so that if I've got a newborn, you know what, a Pampers ad is just fine for me. But if I've got a newborn, stop sending me sports car ads. Because even though I'd love to have a sports car, I am in the market for a minivan, unfortunately. I've got two, actually, and I shouldn't have said that because you'll think very differently of me. But that's the reality. And so this nirvana of making advertising truly relevant to who you are and what stage of life you're in, that's where this is heading. And we're very hard at work on that, where these things can happen. For example, at a commercial break for 30 Rock, historically, that show had tended to err on the side of having an audience that was predisposed to diet beverages. Just happened to be the case. Not 100%, but over 50%. So what would happen is that the Coca-Cola company they'd say, okay, I guess we'll run a Diet Coke ad on 30 Rock, and we'll run a Coke ad on The Daily Show with Colbert Report. That makes sense in a world where you don't have any other options. But what we do is we actually let users choose at the commercial break, do you want to watch a Diet Coke ad, a Coke ad, or a Sprite ad? And so it's so much better for the consumer because they can self-select, they're much more engaged. So much better for the advertiser because they're not advertising Diet Coke to me. I would never drink a diet beverage to save my life. And so it works in many ways for all. And so that's where I think advertising is heading. And then most importantly, advertising that works extremely well for marketers. I think everybody is going to be held to an extremely high standard in terms of results. And so these ad services that try and kind of shield the results from their clients ain't going to happen in the future. It's going to be a transparency. The results are going to stand on their own. And the people that actually do the blood, sweat, and tears to actually build services that work, they're going to do really, really well. The folks that didn't invest their hard-earned time and energy in that, they're absolutely going to be on the wrong side of the river. And so that's where I think media is heading. I think there's a lot of things that can sort of influence sort of your career choices and where you think about things, but this is something that I think is absolutely going to happen in terms of where media is headed. So I would love to just take 2 slides to talk about your adventure and 2 things that I thought would be helpful to kind of impart. And again, take it for what it's worth. It's worth the price of admission, which was free, by the way. I knew that. So the first one is find your passion. You've got to find your passion. And hopefully your passions are finding you right now, or God forbid, maybe they already found you before you came to Carolina. But I can't stress enough to expose yourself to as many things as possible. I think this is why the undergraduate experience is so magical, because it's this amazing 4-year period where you have this license to go do crazy stuff that suddenly once you graduate is people scratch their head and say, what are you doing that for? But here you can go off to China, you can go to Africa for a study abroad, you can go, do random crazy things during the school year and during the summers off and all these kind of things. I would strongly encourage you to do that as much as possible, because what you'll find is your passions will emerge. You will find things that if money were no object, if money were absolutely no object, you will find the thing that you would actually choose to do so, even if you didn't get paid for it. That's your passion. For me, here I was 12 years old reading biographies about Walt Disney. I was 12 years old. I wasn't reading the comic books and reading sort of the glossy sort of animation books by Walt Disney. I was reading the gory biography of Walt Disney. And so I would strongly encourage you to find your passions, because when you've found your passion and you actually allow yourself to sort of close off what the outside world is telling you in terms of, you must go to Wall Street or you must do this consulting gig, and you actually say, you know what, if I'm passionate about this thing and there is a legitimate chance to actually make a living in that, I found that people tend to do very well. And again, this is, I'm simplifying the world, but if you love what you do, and you don't let the world get you down, and you keep trying, and you write another cold call letter, and you make another phone call, and you just keep going and going and going. Eventually, good things do happen. I've seen it happen to so many good people that I admire and respect, where they basically they don't work for a living. They love what they do, and you talk to them, they never say that they have a job. They work very hard, by the way. They are incredibly committed, but they never say that they have a job. And wow, that's career nirvana to me, is that when you can actually do what you love and never feel that you have a job. And so that would be my one piece of advice, which is to very much sort of either find your passions or let your passions find you. The second piece of advice that I would offer is that, you know, this whole thing about sort of all the craziness that has happened in media the past 10 years in terms of people blaming the internet, but not really understanding that, no, it's about the customer. And the internet just enabled certain companies to actually serve customers better. It enabled companies that were so obsessive about customers to really do some damage. What I would suggest to you is that, you know, there's two ways to think about a career. One is to go where the puck is. And so this is just a hockey puck on ice. You could go where the puck is, and I think that you know, it's fine, it's safe, it's you know, I think that there's obviously a lot less risk in that, but I would argue that there's great risk that you will be trapped in traditional ways of doing business that tend to be very hard for those types of you know, companies to emerge and change on a dime. It's very, very hard when you you know, go to, let's say, a certain company that has done things the same way for a long, long period of time. The ability to change and sort of innovate in those environments, pretty tough. The cultures aren't even matched up in that, you know, young kind of you know, hardworking folks, they tend not to get singled out in those environments. It's not like, you know, a company that hasn't done anything different over the last 50 years, they're going to suddenly single out a 23-year-old Carolina grad and say, look what that person's doing. They're breaking up our business. They're totally changing everything. Isn't that great? No, they're going to be like, get that person out of here. We're just trying to keep the good gravy train going. And so for me, that was one of the things that influenced my decision to go to Amazon, because that whole culture was about actually innovating and obsessing about the customer and just basically saying, forget about everything else. And fortunately for Amazon, they didn't have anything else to worry about. They had no legacy business. So granted, it was a lot easier when you're starting from zero. But they had the luxury of having a culture that just started with the customer and didn't listen to anything else. And so, well, wait a minute. If customers are telling us that they want massive selection, they want low prices, and they want to be able to shop 24/7, 365 days a year, guess what? We can do that. And we're going to use the internet to do that. And so I would argue that you're much better off as you think about your career, thinking about, in the space that you're passionate about, ask yourself what the customers in that area, what they truly care about, what motivates them, what would delight them. And I'm a big believer in this quote that Wayne Gretzky said, which is, he said, I skate to where the puck will be, not where it has been. And I would argue, and I've seen this my entire career, is that when you focus on the customer and you obsess about them and you listen closely and you invent on their behalf, you are skating to where the puck will be. And that has changed everything in my career. And I would hope that a similar strategy would help those that are seniors or grad students or whatnot as you guys think about your careers. And so that is my gig. That is you know, my talk. And so, Gene, I don't know if you want a question or two or not. So it sounds like we can take questions. So if anyone has questions, just raise your hand. I will repeat the question so that everybody in the room can hear it. And there is no such thing as a rude question, by the way. So feel free to slam Hulu. That is totally fair. No brave soul. In the back. In the back.
When can we expect an iPhone app?
Oh, I've heard this question before. So the question, for those that didn't hear, is when can we expect a Hulu iPhone app? And it's a fair question. I will disappoint you in saying that I never talk about Hulu's product roadmap for competitive reasons. We never show our cards in terms of what the future will hold in terms of our product decisions. I will say that, you know, we certainly are aware of the iPhone. We're very aware of these crazy things called mobile devices, and I do believe that when you take a look at the evolution of media, the single biggest class of internet-connected devices are going to be mobile devices, easily, and it's not going to take long. Right now, it's personal computers, but when you look at the number of cell phones, most of them today on the planet are not connected to the internet. They're just cell phones without internet access. You know, the smartphones, which by the way won't be called smartphones in 5 years because everyone will be a smartphone. That's going to by far dominate the internet-connected devices. And Hulu, our belief is that any internet-connected device is a fantastic opportunity for Hulu. And by the way, that can be a car. The headrests of cars have internet connectivity now and can show video. It can be a cab. It can be a refrigerator. It can be a mobile device. So please know that at a high level, and I'm not talking anything specific, so please know that for competitive reasons, there's nothing that I'm saying here in that right way. But we believe in mobile, and we think that that's going to be a very, very important part of the evolution of media, specifically a company like Hulu. Yes?
Okay, media seems to be married to advertising still, and yet I feel like customers are worrying increasingly that they don't, one of the things they want in their experience is not to be subjected to advertising. Do you ever see those two diverging?
It's interesting. So the question is, advertising is a huge industry. Just in the US alone, it's $60 billion that is invested against premium video content. So $57 to $60 billion is how much advertising revenue is placed against shows like 30 Rock or House or Modern Family and others. The question is, but there's a lot of people that don't like advertising. And so how do we go forward there? I think that it's very important that when you ask people, hey, would you pay to have no advertising in this content? About 47% of people say that they would pay. Now that's what people say versus what they do, so please keep in mind that it's very dangerous exercise when you do customer research and you think that that's the way that the world plays out. But I certainly believe that media is going to have a lot of different business models. I think there's going to be plenty of business models that are for pay, without ads, and that can either be a la carte pricing like iTunes, it can be a subscription service like Netflix, and you can also have ad-supported, where if you take a look at Hulu, that's a free service. And so, that's 40 million users a month. Clearly, the market is responding to that. But I've been always very sober about the fact that there's a lot of media out there. And by the way, not all of it is going to be free ad supported. I think HBO and Showtime are great examples where shows like Entourage and Flight of the Conchords and True Blood, you're not going to find those on the internet or anywhere else on a free ad supported basis. I just don't see that happening anytime soon. So if Hulu wants that content to show up on Hulu, guess what? It would be paid for. And so that's an example of you have to listen to your customers. And by the way, not just users, but also content owners who own the rights to Entourage and Flight of the Conchords. And if they as customers feel very passionate about a subscription model for Flight of the Conchords or Entourage, that's something that we need to consider. And so I think you're going to see a healthy mix. And the most important thing is give the consumer choice. And so if you value not having any ads, I think it's important that you have that choice. The worst thing to do would be not to have consumers have choice, because then you force them into means that are illegal and whatnot. That's why piracy, by the way, did so well in music for so long, and still does, by the way, because the legitimate owners of the rights to music didn't move fast enough to provide a credible alternative when people were saying, I'm done with this CD stuff. I want to buy that song now. And it's 10:30 at night and the record shop is closed. I want it now. And you're not giving me any legal way to do it, so I think I'll just go get it off of Napster. So I think you're going to see a combination of models going forward in media. Hand back there? Okay.
One thing that's not necessarily considered, I think, is the issue of bandwidth usage. And while there are some programs like in testing right now for capped bandwidth usage for ISPs, how do you feel about capped bandwidth usage, and how are you preparing for the possibility that that might eventually become an issue for you?
So the question is about bandwidth, which is the notion of metered broadband or capped broadband in terms of you can only use so much a month if you're on a certain plan. I think that if certain companies, ISPs, go that route, I think they're going to lose a lot of business. Because what's going to happen is that some small broadband startup is going to say, well, wait a minute, there's an opportunity here, because broadband service providers have 90% margins right now in their business, 90%. And so some startup is going to say, well, wait a minute, I can survive with 30% margins. And you know what? I'm not going to have capped or metered broadband. I think I'll just actually make it, a buffet where it's all you can eat. So I think that while there's talk about that and there's a lot of debate, I actually don't think it's going to go that way. I think that eventually what will happen is that the margins of ISPs will go down, as they should, because there's lots of competition in the marketplace. But I don't see it going to sort of a metered sort of process or system. That's where cell phones started. And cell phones really didn't break out and become a big deal until they became, hey, make as many calls as you want in the US. And that's just the way the service works now. So there's very much a competition angle to that, and also a consumer focus side of that. Yep.
One thing I was thinking about as you were speaking is the legendary quote about the job of the journalist
So I'd say that, again, this is all about sort of your view on the world. If you come at it from the standpoint of the way the world has been and, kind of thinking about, well, gosh, how can I think about that world and just persist it? I think a lot of people will be very disappointed. But if you start it from the standpoint of Michael Arrington at TechCrunch, for example, who basically, he didn't worry about the legacy of journalism. What he thought about was, well, okay, I don't have a copy editor. I don't. He didn't. That did not concern him. He has grammatical errors in his posts sometimes. And by the way, the first customer comment will tell him, by the way, you misspelled this word, and he'll then fix it in real time. And so his readers are his copy editors. Now, the New York Times, that would be a travesty. That would literally be something so unbelievably painful for them to do that. But for Michael Arrington, he didn't consider any other way. It was just him in a bedroom. And so I think that when you think about it as a journalist, I think it comes down to if you focus on the fact that there's always going to be news generated, always. So that's like a really good side of being a journalist. So that's a great gig. The pipeline is always going to be very rich. But the means and the sense of urgency and the timeliness and the degree to which people participate, fundamentally different versus where it was before. And so I think that if you just take the mindset of, well, my God, if something is happening right now, if I don't post that to Twitter within 15 seconds, I'm late. I am late, and my audience is going to consider me late. One of the reasons why TechCrunch is so good is that he is the first to post news on high technology startups. Always the first. There's sometimes when other people scoop him, but hardly ever. And he'll post a story at 2 a.m. in the morning. He'll post a story at any godly hour. I don't know when the guy sleeps, but it's very impressive. And so that's the way that I would think about it as a journalist, is just recognize that you got to start at the consumer and work backwards and leverage all the wonderful tools you have because of the internet.